Okay, so thank you, TV79. I'd like to call this meeting to order. It's Wednesday, December 4th. This is a regular meeting of the Pear Beach Building Committee. Welcome, everyone. At the risk of getting my hand slapped by the Robert's Rules Police, I'm going to make, with the permission of the committee, I'm going to make a quick tweak to the agenda and just welcome our, pardon? Well, I'm being guided to ask for a motion to make a change to the agenda, invite a motion to make a change to the agenda, to welcome our two new members. So all in favor? I see I'm going to be kept honest here this evening, so thank you for that. So with that, I'd like to welcome our two new members, Krista McNamara, who is here representing the Board of Selectmen, and Frank Huck, who's representing the Board of Finance. Welcome, guys. And would you like to say a few words of introduction, maybe, before we move on?
No, I'm just looking forward to working with the committee and
wonderful.
Thank you.
Great. Frank?
Sounds right.
Okay.
That's great. Thank you for that. Okay, so with that, we'll move on to our next item on our agenda is the approval of the minutes from the October 23rd meeting. I think everybody has those. And I would invite a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved.
Second. All those in favor? Great. Wonderful. Thank you.
Abstain.
Yeah. And so, once again, moving on to the next item, what I've done here, and I've circulated to the members of the committee, I put together a little recap. You know, it's been a while since we met. We had been meeting on a pretty much bi-weekly basis, or once every couple of weeks. So this was a bit of an extraordinary gap since our last meeting on October 23rd. And I guess as things sometimes happen, quite a lot has taken place since the last time we were together. Do you have a copy of this? You can pass that to Adele. That's great. And I thought I would just use this to guide the conversation. So what I suggest doing here is I'll step through it, and we can chat about each of these items as you guys feel you'd like to. So the first here is just a little bit of a timeline that just shows essentially what's happened between the 23rd and this evening. So with that, as I mentioned, the last time we met was on the 23rd. We received a letter from Chief Anderson on October 31st. You all have that. We've discussed it a number of times, and in that letter, the Chief outlines this, essentially the request for kind of incorporating a set of requirements or needs into the activities of the building committee and what we're doing down at the beach. We had that letter, we've looked through it. We subsequently met, a small group of us subsequently met with the chief on the following Monday.
If you touch it on the paper, I'll try to read it back.
So there was a follow-on meeting with the chief just to seek some clarification. So Martha, myself, Randy, representing the committee, met. Jamie was at that meeting along with Kate Bush, and Pam was there along with the chief. Captain Marin was there, and Dan Errett, who's a member of the Marine Division, was also there. And we spent some time, and the chief and his team just essentially outlined and explained just in some depth what the kind of the background on what was included in the letter. I won't go into that now. You have the letter. If there's anybody who has any questions about what's in that letter, we can discuss it, but kind of just in the interest of time, we'll just kind of move along. And then on that same day, later in the day, we received an email from Jamie outlining a series of suggestions, and just maybe also as a kind of to set some context. When we left the meeting on the 23rd, the committee was essentially on track to have Neil Houck present to the ZBA on November 20th. In Jamie's note to us, Jamie took the opportunity to essentially do a couple of things, outline from her perspective a number of kind of elements or deliverables that she would like to see the committee focusing on and completing. I think in part what may have triggered that letter as well was the additional information that we'd received from the police Marine Division, DPD Marine Division. The fact that that information in scope went, I would say, quite a bit beyond what at least we as a committee were anticipating we'd hear back from the Marine Division. I think, the focus of our activity up until that point was, in terms of our questions to the Marine Division, centered around how much space did they need in the lower level, and to what extent, what the storage requirements were. And as we learned, the request went a bit beyond that. So back to Jamie's letter, I think, and on the heels of that, as well as, I think Jamie feeling as though there was some additional elements that we'd be in a better position having buttoned down before we moved along to ZBA and the other gates, the other approval gates. Jamie made the suggestion that we not go to ZBA on the 20th and instead focus on just kind of once again closing the gap on a number of elements that remained outstanding. Here you'll see I marked out we had election day, which kind of brings us to the new members on the committee. And then I would say the other major kind of event that took place in the intervening weeks was the Parks and Recs Commission meeting that took place on the evening of 11/20. And at that meeting, Lori Bora had invited members of the Darien Police. So we had Chief Anderson with us, Captain Marin was with us, and Jamie attended as well and took the opportunity to further explain, provide background, set some context, and further explain the requirements. So that kind of essentially, that as well as, in fact, the fact that we had previously made the decision that we would withdraw our application to ZBA. So we had presented to ZBA all of the information and all the paperwork that was required to present on the 20th, and went through the formal process of withdrawing that application and sending letters out to the neighbors as well to indicate that we had withdrawn our application. So that basically brings us to kind of where we are this evening. A lot's happened. I think in substance, my own take is, I'm not sure, with the exception of the additional information that we got from the Marine Division, I'm not sure that, any of these other elements are particularly material. I think the fact that we're focusing and kind of drilling down on a couple of items that I think we either could have done previously, and I'll explain what those are, or would have been done later in the process, and I'll explain what those are. I think, my sense is we're still fairly much on track. So that's a quick timeline. If anybody does anybody have any questions around, kind of, or require any further explanation around just kind of bringing us and setting some context, bringing us up to date? Okay, so with that then, there are a set of elements that are currently underway, and I'll just briefly kind of run us through those, and if you guys have any questions on those, stop me and feel free to ask for clarification. So the first of those is in that category of one of these elements that ideally, probably in hindsight, would have been better had we done it earlier, but we'll do it now, and that is, and this is in large part in response to feedback we'd gotten from members of the community, and that is around the renovation option. And what we're doing here is we are preparing now an estimate. Meaning we've asked Neil Houck to compile and prepare an estimate around what we can accomplish with the $96,000. The $96,000 is kind of refers back to what FEMA allows us in terms of a budget to spend on renovation of the existing structures, the existing non-compliant structures. And that falls into the category of FEMA's 50% rule. So Neil has begun that work. It's underway. My last conversation with Neil, just checking in on when he thinks he'll have that for us. I think we should be in a position to come back and present that to the committee at our next meeting on the 18th. And kind of essentially what we're looking at doing here is, it should be fairly self-evident, but I think what we're planning on doing is identifying the cost of specific elements that would fall into the category of be candidates for improvements, things like new windows, new doors, door sills, porcelain fixtures, door handles. There's also a requirement that for a project of this magnitude, we have to spend a certain percentage of that budget on making it ADA, kind of improving the ADA accessibility of the structure. So Neil will point that out to us as well. So, without going into further detail, because it's still something that's coming together, the intention would be to come back and present that to the committee and present that to the community on the 18th, at least a draft of that. And of course, we'll have an opportunity to discuss it and kind of question it and challenge it and do whatever we feel we need to do around that. But so before I move on to the next item, any questions on how that's coming together? Or
Well, one question. Has Neil met with the building department? Because some things could be phased in, like new fixtures would be under maintenance. It would not be attributable to the 50% rule budget.
Yeah. So Neil has met and spoken to the building department on more than one occasion in preparing this. And what Neil has also separately done is reached out to, in fact, an actual contractor, as opposed to just working off his own numbers, has been to the site with a contractor, and once again, in preparing, what he'll share with us on the 18th. So I think what we'll see will be, probably a fairly good read on what can be accomplished. And I'm getting the sense of the way I was initially thinking we would kind of essentially just work off, compile a list of things, like X windows, a window costs this, there's X of them, if you want to replace all the windows, this is the number. But I think Neil may be bringing it to the next level and actually kind of proposing a couple of different scenarios of what can be done within each tranche of work. What I'm referring to here is the 3-year look back. So essentially the way the 3-year look back works, which is also a FEMA kind of constraint, is that you're allowed to spend 50% of the appraised value of an existing non-compliant structure in any 3-year window. So if you spent, in this case it's $96,000. If you spent that $96,000, you can't essentially spend another penny on that if it's considered to be an improvement that falls into the FEMA category for another 3 years. So I think what we may see from Neil would be kind of a proposal or suggestion as to what to do in that first tranche, the first year activity, and the subsequent tranches going out following 3 years and then the 3 years out.
Is he going to have any schematic drawings, interior, exterior?
Yes, I believe so. Last I'd spoken with him, there was a little bit of back and forth on it, but last I'd spoken with him, I believe we're likely to see something that kind of suggests, kind of lays it out in a schematic form for us.
I'm sorry, my question is then, Neil also have the list of what would consider, like what kicks off our 96,000 versus what is not in that list, or is it all inclusive? So he has that designation.
If you're referring to what
falls under that 96,000.
As opposed to kind of a pure maintenance.
Correct.
That wouldn't be considered, yes.
Correct, that would start, i.e. the 3 years running, or that would not be relevant to sort of this discussion. Okay, and my other question, has he been given any guidance as for what came up in the meeting with the police department and the Marine Division?
Not yet, and I'll get to that if I may. Yeah.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, thanks. So that's that, and once again, kind of on reflection, it would have been great if we'd, done that earlier, but we'll get that done now, and we'll have it done before the end of the year. The next item on the list of elements that we're working through is, I think what's kind of being referred to as the Coastal Area Management Report. And that is essentially a document that will lay out, just for reference here, we went back and, as we were preparing for this ZBA, we went back and pulled the information from the 78 ZBA application that referred to, or that kind of controlled the work that was done in rebuilding the existing buildings after they had previously burned down. And in that file, there's a document that's about a page and a half. It's done by a fellow by the name of, I think it's Dave Emerson, if I remember off the top of my head. And it essentially lays out kind of just a quick summary and synopsis of kind of existing conditions and some minor suggestions around what to do with the site. When I inquired as to what that document was to Jeremy, the answer I got was that was, I think, the equivalent of what we're probably talking about here. And it was a very kind of perfunctory document If anybody would like to, once again on the committee, see that again, I think circulate that around. But my sense is we'll go beyond that page and a half document this time around. So we have Dan Biggs. Dan is with Weston and Sampson, and Dan is in the process of compiling, and Weston and Sampson is in the process of compiling that coastal area management report. And I'm anticipating that we'll see that. If we don't see it on the 18th, because there's still some work to be done on that, then we'll be in a position to review that in our first meeting in January. And that essentially kind of lays out a definition of kind of a survey of the existing conditions at the site and an analysis of the impact of any proposed changes that we're making on the site. It'll touch on, of course, the work on the boat ramp, the parking lot, an analysis of kind of the coastal conditions as well, in terms of habitat and kind of resiliency and that type of thing. So it's being compiled. We'll see a draft of that, and then, of course, we'll have an opportunity to go through that, ask for any additional information we'd like to see there. And so that's another element that's currently underway. By the way, I mentioned that we kind of saw a brief of that version of that in the ZBA application. What I've been told is that typically we don't generally see that type of report, at least of the magnitude that we're talking about, until you get to planning and zoning. But I think, given the context of what we're doing here, I think it seems to us that it makes much better sense to have that in preparation for the move to ZBA as well. So, yeah, please.
Sorry.
No, please go ahead.
The coastal area management report was in the town clerk's office years and years ago when I was on coastal management. We referred to that many times. So if anybody wants to look at it, I believe it's still down there. No, it's.
You're talking about like a generalized report now, or something specific to the beach?
Well, it used to be about this thick, but then when we were working on that years ago and dredging the harbor and everything, we had synopsis of it. So it was all filed in the minutes and everything down in the town clerk's office.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think we may be referring to two different things.
Well, this is the Coastal Area Management Act. There's only one.
Yeah, what I'm referring to would be...
You're referring to pieces out of it.
Yeah, exactly right. That's specific to a particular project.
Right.
Yeah. So...
But there are pieces.
Yeah.
Now, does the coastal engineer have input to this?
That's my understanding.
They sign off on it?
Yeah, that's my understanding. And then I think, we as a committee, we may want to have kind of a peer review done on that as well. We can discuss that when we see what we're dealing with.
But who is the engineer?
It's Weston and Sampson, so I don't have a specific name.
Okay.
And as I said,
we didn't hire an outside person?
No, the initial cut is being done by Weston and Sampson, and that was part of their remit.
Okay.
And as I said, if we feel the need to bring in and I think I would recommend that we would do that, but we can get to that when we see the report. We can bring in a third-party engineer.
I thought that was in Jamie's request, was to get a coastal engineer. Hire and receive a report from coastal engineer firm to provide a third-party analysis of environmental condition and recommendations.
That was on my recommendation.
What?
What you just read.
Oh, so the third party is Weston and Sampson?
No, the third party would be someone to be named.
After them?
Correct.
Okay, got
So
it.
Weston and Sampson's doing a report, and then we as a committee, it's a suggestion, a recommendation from Jamie, and we as a committee can kind of deliberate over it and make a determination if we think this.
Okay, got it.
And my recommendation would be that we, not to jump the gun, that we do that. So that's that. The next element here is...
Mr. Chairman, can I interrupt Pam 1 second before you go? Because you have an important topic on the agenda. Item on the agenda. The check valve has...
Still waiting on an estimate. Met with the contractor, followed up with him. He said, please be patient. And that's simply what I'm doing. So I'll follow up with him again tomorrow. But I was probably about 2 weeks ago that I followed up.
Okay.
Have we looked at if we were to expand the beach or redo the parking lot in terms of curbs, whether, this could fall within that area and you might want to, wait. Because if we expand the beach
Right,
or put a curb.
we're simply just getting an estimate now of what exactly he thinks it would entail, so that we can get a feeling for whether or not that could be something that we could do in maintenance as a maintenance fix, or as you said, should we wait? So he should probably have some good impact on that.
Can we ask him maybe to give us more of an update on the
Yes.
more thorough update when we see him together on the 18th?
We'll do.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, I'm off with that.
Yeah.
On the side, it's not at high tide. Comes up in the park, comes up through the sewer in the parking lot, but if you can check it out.
Okay. So the next item here is on the topic of test borings. And this is, again, one of these items that we, as I understand it, we typically wouldn't necessarily need to produce until we got to planning and zoning. But it just does appear as though it's kind of more prudent to do this sooner rather than later to make sure that we're not dealing with anything that could potentially be a showstopper in any of what we're planning on here. So what we've done is asked Neil to provide us with a series of proposals. I think we'll treat those in the same way that we treated the proposals that came in for the site survey that we did. I think it's fairly black and white in terms of what these guys do. They'll bring in a rig, they'll do borings, and then what they'll also do is a separate analysis then of what they've learned through the borings. It's kind of a geotechnical analysis and a hydrologic analysis as well. So we're in the process of getting those proposals. I'm hoping that we'll have an update for you guys on the 18th when we're together on both, who we're looking at and potentially the timing of that.
And as I think we talked about, I survey the harbor every 3 years. The last one we did was October of last year, and I provided him with that data as well as the data previously.
Yeah.
Just as a reference point.
So October of 2018.
2018.
Yep.
And this is being done under Hawk's contract?
No, this was not included in what we had contracted Neil to do for us.
Because our RFP did indicate, right, phase 1 performed geotechnical investigation analysis for building foundations.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just,
Yeah.
okay.
So do you have any kind of an estimate on what this may cost us?
We'll have to see what we get through the proposals. I'm reluctant to talk about numbers at this point.
Okay.
Probably something. I would think it's probably something in the $5,000 to $7,000 range.
Yeah.
The hydrophonic survey was about $3,500.
Yeah.
That's not.
But again,
We'll see when the RFP comes back.
Yeah, exactly right.
I only surveyed from the Coast Guard buoys in and around the channel about 20 feet away from the end of the boat ramp. Mm-hmm. Because that technically is where my jurisdiction ends.
Yeah.
As the state.
Mm.
So.
Yeah. And these will be borings, at the boat ramp and in the area of the boat ramp, certainly in the area of the site as well. So. Okay. So that's that. And then the next element here is on the topic of the Marine Division requirements. I think we all know where we are with that. We're awaiting further information. I think as we learned in through the meeting that took place on the 20th, there's a dialogue that's taking place between the DPD and the Police Commission. My understanding, and I'm not sure if this is confirmed or not, is that there's a Police Commission meeting on the 11th. I believe that needs to be confirmed. At least I looked on the calendar. I didn't see it later this afternoon. I think the expectation, as Jamie had laid it out, would be to get an indication from the Police Commission that the Police Commission, along with DPD, is supportive of the request. Following on that, as I see it, there'll be another round, I think, of conversation that'll take place with the Commission. And then I guess the other remaining element to this before we really move forward on it is that our charge at the moment doesn't really kind of empower the building committee to move forward with the requirements, as we currently understand them here. So I think what we'll probably do is go back to Jamie and the Board of Selectmen and ask that we just amend the charge to assure that we've got coverage to continue on with this additional, activity that's kind of emerged now. So any questions on where we are with that? Okay. And then we just heard from Pam on the check valve. So, essentially these are the items that are in motion at the moment and underway. I think, all of them equally significant and important, and I think they'll provide us with a lot of, additional insight, as we kind of move on to what I'm reflecting here. Then it's kind of the next key milestone for us, which would be the ZBA, the presentation to ZBA, going back to ZBA. And for that, we don't have a date. I think, we as a committee can make a determination once we've kind of, had the opportunity to go through this additional information in terms of restarting the process to ZBA. So, once again, kind of a lot has taken place since last we were together. A lot is kind of in motion at the moment in terms of gathering up additional information. And maybe I'll just open it up to additional questions at this stage if anybody wants any clarification around what's taking place.
The Park and Rec Commission is, I guess, reevaluating the charge.
No.
No.
Well,
I mean, I thought that's what Jamie asked.
yeah.
I
So
thought the same thing.
let's spend a couple of moments on it. My understanding of what was asked is that I think what Jamie had pointed out was two things. One is with the information that we'd gotten from Marine Division, that was certainly something that went beyond what was originally kind of spelled out in the charge. I think what Jamie was also kind of reflecting on is that kind of where the building committee is at and where we are at with the commission kind of has evolved to a point that there may be some elements that are out of sync with the original charge. One of those I think that Jamie had pointed to was the charge reflects, just kind of restating what Jamie had said in the meeting, the charge indicates renovate or build. And I think Jamie's point was, well, you guys are doing both, renovating and building. So the Marine Division one is an easy one. I think the Marine Division one is something that we just have to capture in the charge and make sure that we're authorized to proceed with doing things that go beyond what we're currently focusing on. I'm not sure how much work needs to be done to kind of harmonize the charge otherwise with what we're up to here. I think that's really a question for Jamie, honestly. The charge comes from the Board of Selectmen, comes from Jamie. I'll reach out at some point over the next couple of weeks and just get some further clarification. But I think the bigger of those elements is, the kind of more significant of the elements is just reflecting the fact that if it turns out that we're, through feedback that we get back from the police commission, that they'd like us to proceed with, what's been asked of us. I think the charge does need to be updated to just reflect the fact that we'd be working on requirements now from the Marine Division, in addition to whatever else we're looking at. So that's my take. If you guys have a different read on it, let's chat about it.
Well, I thought Lori, in the meeting, when I watched it again, afterwards, Lori said, isn't it the Board of Selectmen that writes the charge?
It is the Board of
And
Selectmen.
it was the Board of Selectmen that wrote the charge.
Correct.
In the
Correct.
beginning.
Correct.
And then I thought she had said that she wanted the commission to take more of a leadership role in this, and that the commission to look at the charge and revise the charge. That was my take on it.
Yeah, no, I mean...
You were there
Well,
too, Krista.
I did watch it. I mean, I know like some components you were addressed were the food. The idea of concession, like there were some components, whether or not, how those are going to be addressed and by
Right.
whom. I know that was one item. And if the commission is going to take that up in a little bit more detail to set guidance to the building committee.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's something that, we can go back, I'm not sure that's really something that's reflected in the charge. I mean, it's reflected in the charge, but...
It came up,
Yeah, I think Jamie's general call to arms was, or call to action was to kind of maybe kind of heighten the level of kind of interaction and coordination between the commission and on some elements, to your point, like concession. I think
That was just my example.
a bit of lack of clarity still that remains around concession. And my understanding is that there are a couple of members on the commission that will be looking more deeply into that and coming back with recommendations, both to the commission and then ultimately back to the committee on that. So yes, there's work that's got to be done on the charge. I think it needs to be clarified in terms of the extent of that. But just to be clear, because I think there were some questions that were raised by maybe members of the public at some point early on, the charge comes to the building committee from the Board of Selectmen, from Jamie. I mean, we didn't write our own charge here.
No,
Yeah. And the commission didn't write the charge.
No, but I mean, if we're gonna get figures on rehabilitate or build new, who's gonna make that decision and when?
Who's going to make what decision?
Whether we build new or rehabilitate.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, my sense, and I'm taking a lead on getting these estimates together and presenting them to the committee, really to kind of close the loop on a bit of information that I think from the public's perspective and from others' perspective, that it's been indicated to us that, it's desired and it's kind of been outstanding. So I don't think that it in any way kind of suggests we're going back around looking at whether we're building new or renovating. I mean, the question's been raised, and we're going to answer the question. I think the question's been raised, what can you guys do for $96,000? So we're going to present that information, or at least a kind of a cut of that information, and hopefully that satisfies the question around what we could do for $96,000. I mean, at this stage, the commission's voted multiple times on the path that we're on right now. So I would suggest we not get ahead of ourselves maybe, at this stage. I think I'd like to just suggest that we leave it as we're coming back and we'll have information around what we can do for $96,000 and
Let the discussion go from there.
Yeah. When we have the facts, we'll discuss, present, and somebody makes the decision.
yeah.
But we could ask for guidance if we wanted, right?
Pardon?
We could ask for guidance from Parks and Rec.
Absolutely, yeah, and we have done that, on multiple occasions. In fact,
That'd be appropriate.
we referenced at the last commission meeting, and Jamie kind of brought it up, and we referenced it. We brought the committee back to the commission mid-July, and there was a suggestion to kind of do that earlier, and we kind of did check in on a couple of things, but it seemed like we had kind of developed like a critical mass of information as we were kind of getting into July, where it made sense to go back and kind of consult with the commission and maybe push a little bit and test a little bit and question some things. So I think there was a good vigorous conversation, with the commission. But yeah, absolutely. And I'm as a kind of the member in a committee that's a member of the commission, I'm certainly doing that on a regular basis as well. But yeah, I mean, if there's anything that anybody feels as though they need any clarity on, there's a open channel for that. No question about it.
And I'm sorry, circling back on my other question with Neil and what we can expect for next week.
2 weeks.
2 weeks, I'm sorry, 2 weeks,
Yeah.
thank you. Regarding the Marine, will he be incorporating that, or will he be, I would like him to address
Yes, I'm sorry, I
it.
didn't answer your
Okay.
question yet. So I think
We
that,
may not have an answer, but just that.
no, I have an answer.
Oh,
but
okay.
Yeah, no, I think the position we're in right now as a committee, and by virtue of that, the position that Neil is in at the moment,
Yeah.
kind of taking direction from us, is that he's doing nothing.
Okay,
And, this is where I kind of felt as though, like I was getting a little over my skis when we first learned about the information that we'd gotten from the Marine Division. My initial impulse was, okay, I'm going to get that information over to Neil, and we'll have some
That's not
meetings,
our charge.
and I very quickly realized, wait a minute, this is kind of out of our scope here, and I think that's kind of what triggered some of the things, some of the discussion that followed on that. So Neil's ready. He's absolutely willing to kind of proceed with kind of trying to incorporate those requirements when we give him a green light. But I think my sense is we're not in a position to give him a green light until we get feedback back from the police commission, and similarly from the Parks and Recs commission.
okay.
The only other thing maybe I would say at this stage on the topic is, for those of us who were in the meeting that took place on the 4th, there was just a brief discussion around, okay, so what do we do with these requirements? Because they certainly did go. There was an ask for some office space, a desk, communications equipment, a phone, internet access, that go beyond what can be accommodated within, certainly the lower level of the building, and we discussed that a bit. And I think there was a general sense that going in, we're not suggesting increasing the size of the footprint of anything that we've spoken about or kind of, produced up until now in terms of the schematics and the model that we're talking about. So what I think, going into it, I think the basic concept here is that any space that is made available to Marine Division, if we get that far, is coming out of some space that's been kind of defined for something else at the moment. So whether it's the flexible community space or the concession area, we'll have to see what that really translates to. But I think that would be, just back to your question around what direction does Neil have. I think when we get a green light, I think Neil will be asked to try to figure out how to kind of work those requirements into the existing footprint. We're not contemplating coming up with a new schematic or a new building structure or kind of, expanding the size of the existing structure, at least going into it.
All right, thank you.
So that's what I have. Does anybody have any other questions or thoughts around like where we are at the moment? And I guess I would just characterize where we are as we're collecting information. This is kind of important and relevant information that'll inform the conversation and the discussion. And, I think that we'll be in that place for the next couple of meetings. And I think that positions us to make some of the determinations as we get into the January timeframe, but it's kind of essentially where we are.
Yes, I agree. Need more facts and data.
Yeah, and it's all good, and once again, some of this stuff, it would have been better if it was there already, but it will be there, so.
That's why we're volunteers, not professionals.
Exactly right. You live and learn. Okay, so if there's nothing else on that topic, do we want to just move along to the calendar, the meeting schedule? So I think what Pam's explained to us is our comfortable room 119 is not going to be available to us as we go into the new year, this portion of the new year. And just to set some context, what we talked about is moving our time to this time going forward, so from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. And so Pam's laid out some dates here for us in the 7 p.m. timeframe in this space. And I'm not sure we need to take a vote on that. I don't think that's necessary, but
It's not our issue to take a vote. We didn't set the meeting. So.
well, I mean, this is so if I'm sorry, go ahead.
If we have a problem, we could say so.
Pardon?
If we have an issue, we could say so.
Yeah.
We would look at this and that at our meeting on the 18th, we would approve the meeting schedule and get that posted. I mean, that's how I would throw that out as an idea.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think it's just, what we've done.
We could talk about it now.
Get the sense of the
sit
committee.
on it for 2 weeks and then
Yeah.
put it back on the agenda for an action item to approve it and get it posted so everybody can see.
Mm-hmm.
That would be my suggestion.
Okay, so you're suggesting that we need a vote for this?
I suggest we can just talk about it today, and if anyone has any, and then put it as an action item for our next meeting.
Yep. Okay, so,
Do you think we really need to have 2 meetings a month until we really know what we're doing? Or I think we need to hold the room?
I think we need to hold the room. I'm not sure that we need 2 meetings a month at this stage. I think we're, as we get into the kind of going through the approval processes, a lot kind of centers around kind of the outcome of those discussions, but.
Probably the next meeting.
Yeah, but my recommendation, we hold a room, and then we can make a
Okay.
determination, how frequently we're meeting.
Well, one of the dates, is, according to my calendar, is Passover. It doesn't affect me, but.
Right.
Which date
I
is
know,
it?
so I was just going through that
April 8th.
myself.
April 8th?
Yes, the 8th, April 8th.
Is that, are the kids off from school?
Yes.
I don't know, just,
Yep, that's a good catch.
Yeah. On the 22nd is Earth Day.
Yeah, personally, I'm generally okay with these dates. I think maybe to Krista's suggestion, we can just kind of review it over the next couple of weeks and then come back and close it out and get them posted.
When is the April
The
vacation?
school, yeah, I'm just looking that up because I think that's a good point.
I think it's the next week.
Is it it's,
Yeah, because you went around to
Easter
our
is on the
meetings, right?
12th.
So it would be the 8th, be Wednesday, 9th,
No,
11th,
it's always
12th.
a 7 weeks
So Good
from-
Friday would be the 10th,
Good Friday's the 10th, right.
So is that one?
so
But
they're off
It
then.
doesn't always.
So how about if we do what we
I
suggested?
can look
Just
into it,
Yeah,
exactly.
we'll
I
just
will-
look at them over the next couple of weeks and then
Exactly.
come back and close it out. Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so moving on to our next item, new business. Anybody have anything that they'd like to bring to the table?
No?
Okay. So if not, we'll move on to our next item, which is public comment. So we would invite members of the public who've joined us. If you'd like to share any comments, please feel free to invite any comments. Sure. And if you could just come up and just state your, it's a little kind of an uncomfortable setup here, but if you can come up and just state, come on up as close as you want to get to us.
These are the mics.
So you can just let us know how close.
And
And if you could just state your name and your address.
My name is Vincent Shanley. I live at 6 Crane Road, Darien. And
1 second.
Excuse me?
1 second, please.
Yep.
My fingers don't work that fast. Could you spell your last name, please?
Shanley.
Thank you.
Two-prong, if I may. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Sure, of course.
So sometimes that's not expressed, so I'm grateful. The first is an impromptu. Your colleague sitting next to me. We're both at the meeting of the Advisory Commission on Coastal Waters on October 21st, when the Police Department, Marine Unit, two very competent officers made presentation to the committee about what has transpired over the past summer, the usage of the equipment, anything that was pressing or needed or necessary in their minds. They gave a very nice presentation, had a Q&A, and I thought it was a delightful presentation. At no time did they mention anything about additional need for space. At no time did they bring up any request for space. Space was never brought up. And then I think it's just ironic. A couple of weeks later, all of a sudden, the police department needs additional space that comes out of clear blue sky, falls out like manna from heaven. We need space. The second part is one of my folks that are concerned about the beach is indisposed tonight, and they asked me to read a statement. Is that permissible?
Is it your statement or you're reading it on somebody's?
I'm reading it on someone else's behalf.
It's your call if you want to have it registered as yours, or if you want to read it on somebody's behalf. We just need to know who it is and where they're.
I'll read it on my own behalf then. No reason to drag anybody else's. I understand that the police need space at Pear Tree Beach. I also understand that even though the Marine Division has been using a space at the Darien Boat Club for the past 7 years, they would like to maintain a space in the concession building at the beach. What I don't understand is why the current 12.5 by 9.5 square room in the concession building is no longer adequate for the police use for anything but storage. The police chief insinuated that the space contains mold and mildew and isn't habitable. I'm both confused and concerned about the statement. Why, if there has been mold and mildew in that room since Sandy, hasn't it been cleaned or remediated? It makes no sense that in the building, only the police room has mold and mildew, when the 4 other rooms in that building do not have this condition. Surely, if there was mold and mildew in the building, we wouldn't have been serving food in the concession room, which abuts the police room. Nor would we have had our lifeguards sitting in a room with this condition. Nor would we want people visiting our first aid station to be exposed to such a condition. I believe that the current office allocated to the police in the concession building is of the size they require and can be used as soon as they put a desk in it. This is one more reason why renovating the current buildings is preferable to building new buildings that have to meet FEMA requirements. After all, you can't say that the police must have a space on the second level and still keep the lifeguards and first aid station on the first level. You can't follow FEMA's requirements only when it's convenient for the plan. The current building and space meet all the current usage requirements. It just needs to be renovated. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of
Thank you.
myself and
Appreciate that.
name untold.
And yourself.
And myself, okay?
Thanks.
Thank you.
very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Hey,
Delise Bolleton, 150 Pear Street Point Road. I'm going to speak also on the requirement that the police have, just to add to what Vince was saying. You know, I have lived across the street for many years, and before that, I always went to that beach. And I have never seen the police use space on one end of the beach only to have their boat and equipment and where they need to be on the other end of the beach. So I understand that they want some workable space. They've been making do with what the boat club has given them. It may not be ideal, but it's in the right location. So it doesn't really matter what you build at the other end. I cannot imagine that they're going to sit over there and then there's an emergency and they're going to run across the parking lot and hop on their boat. It just isn't logical. So I really hope somebody could clarify with them whether they really need space on the other side of the beach or if they want something that's closer to where they actually work. And my other observation is that this kind of goes to some things you said in tonight's meeting, that you're having Neil Howe put together a list or maybe some sketching of what can be done with the existing buildings and the 96,000. But it sounds like you're just going through the motions to say, okay, we did this, we looked at it, but you have no intention of even considering that as an option. And I find that very disturbing. I think all options should be seriously considered.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, Susie Fahey, Coach Lamp Lane. I came here to speak about Jamie speaking at the last meeting and kind of saying that I walked away with that it was almost a restart, that go back, look at the charge. I also was very confused with what Jamie said. Some of the things she said, I went back and listened to it again. I'm even more confused with some of the things that you've said this evening as far as what you understand the next step to be. I thought it was an opportunity maybe to go back to the master plan of Parks and Recreation, the survey that many of us filled out. Many of us have signed petitions, written letters, come here and spoken. And I thought that this was really an opportunity to go back to what I thought was the original, rehabilitate it and improve it. I don't even understand how the charge of maybe at one time a restaurant, a two-story building with an elevator, so on and so forth. So rather than even what I prepared, I guess after listening this evening, am I hearing that all of the decisions that have been made up to this point and you folks have voted on stand? That nothing any of the community has said and the things we've written and brought up and spoken about have made any impact that perhaps look at this again, that the charge is really to either, well, you kind of said that you're just going back to Neil to get information about rehab would be, but it sounds like those decisions you've made stand and we're really just placating people or filling in a blank that somehow you didn't before. I also have two other questions. In respect to this project, FEMA requirements keep coming up. And those requirements seem to always be in reference to the proposed new two-story structure. What exactly are the FEMA requirements that must be complied with if the project were to only rehabilitate the existing structures besides the investment limitation? Is there anything else that you need to comply with if all you were to do is rehab the buildings? And then my second question is about ADA compliant. When I look at Pear Tree Point and many others, it seems to be pretty ADA compliant right now. If you're in a wheelchair or walker, you pretty much can go wherever you want there. So my question is, if we were to just rehab the existing buildings, what aspects aren't compliant, ADA compliant? Is it just the gazebo and we need to add a ramp to get up to the gazebo? Or if it's only the gazebo that's not compliant, aren't we pretty much compliant anyway? Do you have to do anything else? And if it's the picnic area, is it just adding a little concrete ramp and a platform so that a wheelchair person can access the picnic area? I know you don't usually answer the questions at these meetings, but thank you for your time. And I really do appreciate all the time and effort you folks have put into this project, and that we keep coming and speaking, and that you listen. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else like to?
I received a letter from a
I'm
woman
sorry. We have,
I'm sorry, go ahead. I'll do it last.
Perry Boyle, B-O-Y-L-E, Good Wives River Road.
Thank you.
To echo a previous comment, the chair referred to the path that we are on. That's the path for a $2.5 million two-story commercial kitchen with a marine hardened elevator. That's disturbing to a lot of us. You've talked about coastal management plans or studies. What about basic usage study? What about a basic traffic study? The things that any commercial development in this town would require. It seems like common sense to do those and how you can develop a property without doing those studies. There's been no mention tonight of the community focus group meetings that Ms. Stevenson promised in her letter in the paper. That seems to be an important part of this process that already seems to be getting dropped. It's a little, if you stand back there and you listen to what's going on, the conversations around the charge to this committee, it's not clear who owns the charge to this committee. Is it the selectmen? Is it Parks and Rec? Who will decide whether we go rehab or development? Is it you? Is it Parks and Rec? Is it the selectmen? It's certainly not the community, we know that. There seem to be 9 people here in this room. I think, is anybody here for this development? No. So, yeah, that's 9 people, including me.
10.
Are you 10? Are you for it? Okay, 10 people here showed up because they think that this is the wrong way to go. How many people showed up because they think this is the right way to go? The police request for space is quite suspicious as to the timing, as you mentioned. Is this part of the charge to the committee? I don't believe it is. Are you building a police facility or are you building something for the community? It's ironic that these requirements, and you called them requirements, come from a Ms. Stevenson employee, not from the community. You spent some time talking about a check valve. Check valves are not part of the charge of this committee. Like, why are you spending any time talking about a maintenance issue? This seems odd to me. So in closing, I'm concerned that unless the RTM stops this, we're saddled with an absurdly expensive and inappropriate commercial development in a small environmentally sensitive location. So I really hope that you do what we thought you were going to do, which is reset this and start from scratch and get a new charge that reflects the will of the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Cheryl?
Is that allowable that she's reading something that isn't hers in public comment?
Well, he just did.
Well, I think if you could just mention who it's from, Cheryl.
Yeah, I have.
Yeah, exactly. If it's a Darien resident and
She
state name and
was
address.
unable to attend
Yeah, yeah.
and sent me
Just curious.
the letter. I
Okay.
dropped it in my mailbox.
No, I remember.
Name?
Jennifer Geddes, Geddes,
Hang on a second. Geddes. And address? Street?
West, 324
Just-
West Avenue. Okay.
Yep.
Cheryl, I'm writing as a senior citizen who uses Pear Tree Point Beach on a frequent basis. I feel only minor alterations are needed to Pear Tree Beach, i.e. update bathrooms and perhaps another shade tree or two. One cannot see the water at Weed Beach, nor is it easy for a senior or a handicapped person to access the beach. Not so at Pear Tree. I would urge the committee to modify any proposed changes to Pear Tree Beach. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you for that. Thank you. I'll say a few things. I think it's probably important maybe before we close the meeting. So the first is, I'm not comfortable in the way that you guys are not comfortable with the setup of this public comment process. I find it awkward. It's there for good reason, probably. It's kind of part of the process, and I can imagine without it, committees that are trying to get stuff done could probably find themselves in a kind of a weird situation where they're having, up all night having conversations with folks. I'm not saying in this case, but I'm just saying it's there for good reason. Having said that, I'm not comfortable with it because it creates the scenario where we have members of the community who join us. You have something to say that's very important. You share what you feel very strongly about, and it appears as though we're sitting here mute and not paying attention. So I would simply say that we are paying attention. It's not on an interactive basis, but we are paying attention. So just please take that for what it's worth for me personally. Maybe to clarify, and I'll open it up if any of the members of the committee would like to kind of add their own clarification. My sense in terms of what happened with Jamie, I'll call it, Jamie's outreach to us, Jamie's intervention, the information we got from Jamie, and then her comments at Parks and Recs, is there's a recognition of a couple of things. One is the response from the community is something that the intensity of the response from the community is probably something that was not fully anticipated. Part A. Part B, in terms of the work of the committee, there were things that the committee, as we're learning and as we've been going along, there would have been a benefit if some of those things, in terms of information gathering, were done at the stage we were at, and the fact that and the stage we were at, meaning we're starting to go through the approval gates, and the fact that information wasn't readily, the homework hadn't been done and the information wasn't available, might have been represented a gap from Jamie's perspective. I'm using my own terminology in terms of the working of the committee. So I think Jamie's guidance to us was, committee, go back and kind of do some further homework before you kind of move on to the next stage of this. That's my read on it. So that's in part what we're doing. I think the other, and once again, I'm kind of out on a limb here speaking for the first selectman, but as the chair here, I'll attempt to kind of convey my own interpretation of it. I think the other kind of read was maybe some guidance to the commission as well, and I sit on the commission, so I'll take the liberty of kind of putting that hat on. for the commission to kind of further contemplate, the exercise that we're going through, the project, the exercise. I think to answer the question, I think the way this is set up is that, the commission is an appointed body of, members of the community. It goes through a process. It identified a project. The project was bigger than a bread box, or is bigger than a bread box potentially. I'm hoping the term bread box doesn't end up in Darien Times, in one of the next issues. But and I think, given kind of the history of the way in which projects kind of unfold within town, I think from the selectmen's perspective, that kind of warranted the creation of a building committee. With the creation of a building committee, I think that what starts that off is the definition of a charge that kind of lays out, what the building committee is kind of being asked to do on behalf of one of the commissions. So I'm laying this out because I think good questions. I think they deserve some clarification. I don't think there's any mystery to it. Maybe just to close out a couple of other items here, or just answer a couple of other items. The question was raised around traffic study information sessions. Absolutely. I didn't add them to my note of recap, and I didn't bring them to the table this evening because they're a little bit further out. But certainly beyond the intention, the objective here will be that we will, there's no point in conducting a traffic study in the middle of the winter. I think everybody appreciates that. So we had our window. I think folks understand that we gathered some information in terms of the traffic study in the summer. We engaged the services of WestCog. We did that a little late in the cycle. Once again, live and learn. So we had the services of WestCog middle of July. I think it was July 13th on a Saturday. It was a beautiful day. They did a traffic analysis. We'll present that information. That information hasn't been presented because it's really it's limited at this stage. But at least on that day, there was an indication that there were ample parking spots available throughout the entire day. Ample. There were parking spots of a certain number. I'll take out my qualification to that through the entire day. I did an informal walk around on July 4th. Beautiful day, high tide, midday, and certainly through my informal walk around, which I communicated out every single half hour to, I think every half hour, every 45 minutes to the members of the committee that I was doing it. I think midday, probably around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, there were about 40 available parking spots. Around 5 o'clock in the afternoon on July 4th, there were about 100 available parking spots. Once again, I didn't communicate that out because it was my informal. I'm not suggesting that kind of should go towards any formal analysis. Once again, we engaged the services of WestCog to further conduct a traffic sampling on the weekend of Labor Day, starting at 7 o'clock Friday before Labor Day and ending Sunday evening Labor Day. They did that. They had a camera out. The way this works is they have a camera. They capture every vehicle going in and out of the parking lot. And then they crunch that data and they come back to us with a spreadsheet that shows a whole lot of information in terms of traffic patterns and occupancy through the day. We were anxiously or eagerly anticipating seeing that report on the following week out. WestCog came to pick up their camera on that following Tuesday, and the camera had been stolen. So, I was reluctant to share that information in prior meetings, and it's probably the first time not the first time, but as explicitly as because I felt as though that was kind of a bit of an embarrassment to the community. So I chose not to provide that information in a public setting, but it came up in another meeting, so here it is. My point of bringing it up this evening is to agree. There is a need, because we're dealing in anecdotal information, and that's very, very dangerous, I think, or it's just not productive. So the goal would be to conduct a more formal traffic analysis of, the occupancy of the parking lot once we get back into kind of the active season. So I'm just trying to think of any other questions that might have come up. The other point I would just simply make is, I don't know, I'm guessing there's commissions on, Krista, maybe you can help me. The police commission is open to the public, the police commission meetings, I would imagine.
Absolutely.
So some of the comments that were made this evening and some of the thoughts or concerns raised, I think there's a perfect opportunity to bring those to the police commission when they meet. And I would kind of, encourage you to do that. I think you're well within. I would simply encourage you to do that. So the question of a restart, look, you're all welcome to go back to Jamie and ask Jamie for your own clarification, or to whoever else you feel you need it. My sense is we're not being asked to kind of press the restart button and go back to square one. I think what we're being asked to do is very, very seriously contemplate kind of the feedback that we've gotten, the work that we're doing. My own personal feeling here is that I would like to see the process for the benefit of the community go through to some kind of normal completion, whatever the outcome of that is, so that the community can feel as though, we've gone through a thorough analysis, and it's, there's nothing that could short circuit that. So that's one person's opinion. I've rambled on here a little bit. I feel as though you guys deserve as much information and feedback from us as we can give you. I'm available here. I'm available offline. I'm happy to have conversations with whoever would like to have a conversation with me, and I've done that with many folks. But my sense is we're charged with a job here, and that is to understand how we can proceed with a project that came out of one of the town's commissions, Parks and Recs Commission, and we were further charged by the Board of Selectmen to proceed with that. And that's what we're doing until something changes. So hopefully that provides some clarity around some of the questions that were raised. And maybe with that, my soliloquy here, if anybody else has anything they'd like to add, please feel free before we close the meeting and let everybody go home.
I'd like to say something. I do appreciate all the input that we have gotten from the community. Emails, letters, phone calls, and all the people that have come out to the meetings, numerous amounts of people that have come out in the last year since we started this process. And I think it's extremely important to hear from you all, because sometimes, just like tonight, I heard a couple of different comments come up that I hadn't heard before. So each time somebody thinks of something, it is important to bring it forward. And I encourage you to still keep doing that, and keep in contact with your RTM representatives, because ultimately they're the ones that will vote on this in the end. And it's going through the process is going to be long. There's just no two ways about it. It's probably going to be another year before we even, I hate to say it, get a shovel in the ground, but because I was really hoping it would be this year. But so I just encourage everybody to please keep coming out. It's going to be a long process, and if it's not, too cold, stay home, send us emails. I'd rather stay home. But thank you all for all your comments. I appreciate it, and I'm sure we all do too.
Yeah, I'll second that. Thank you. So, if nothing further,
I make a motion to adjourn.
do we have a second? All those in favor?